Rockstars, and welcome back to String and Story. My name is Holly Knight, and it is my job to guide you to quilt with confidence. And for those of you who have been following along, yes, I am freshly back from QuiltCon. We drove back. Arrived here back in Duluth about 4:45 today, got the truck unpacked, and it's been nonstop ever since. But I will tell you, my luggage is already empty. The laundry is ready to get started right after this, and I am thrilled to be here with you this evening. If you have not yet said hi in the chat, go ahead and do so. I am running on Duncan and Vibes, so if you also came from QuiltCon and are doing the same, solidarity. But here's the thing. I've had so many folks be like, Colleen, you just got back from QuiltCon. You're teaching this masterclass. Like, what's going on? Here's the thing. Y'all weren't able to come to my lecture at QuiltCon. And I want you to see this amazing information, because if you have been stuck asking, how do I quilt it? How do I even begin to get started deciding what to quilt where on my quilts? I'm curious about quilting my own quilts, but I just feel stuck and at a loss of where to even begin. You, my dear, are in the right place. So say hi in the chat. Sally says, I came by your booth at QuiltCon on Friday and bought one of your panels to practice free motion quilting. Happy serendipity that you're doing this quilting session online. Yes, Sally, indeed. I am thrilled. I hope you had a wonderful QuiltCon. I had a wonderful QuiltCon. I have the concept of a voice. That's all I've got at this point. Let's see. Karen says, hi from upstate New York. Oh my goodness. Are you staying warm, Karen? Juliet says, I'm in Nebraska. Susan is in Michigan. Jane in Oregon. John in Boston. Hello, Melanie. It was so good to hug you this weekend. Let's see. I'm not the only one doing a quick turnaround. Oh, Lisa, hello. Nancy in Anaheim, California. Donna in Canada. We are international. Kathleen in Idaho. Teresa up in upstate New York and was at QuiltCon. Huzzah. Hello, Jan. How are you? Betsy in sunny, warm Phoenix. You know, that sounds really nice right about now. Anne here in Georgia. You were at QuiltCon, Teresa. I see. Sue in Michigan. Pauline, Cindy in Ontario, Canada. Leanne in Iowa. Brenda in Michigan. Cheryl in Ohio. Anne in Vermont. Brandy in Austin. Jane, can you see me? I'm live. Hit refresh. And Andy is here as well. Oh my gosh, Andy, it was so good to see you in Raleigh. I hope your QuiltCon was as much fun as mine was. You know, it's interesting. I had a few people stop me yesterday and they're like, girl, like you are still shenaniganing. You are still cracking up. You are still goofing off. Like how? And I love to remind folks, QuiltCon is my favorite event of the year, and I was not going to waste a second of it. So we went strong to the end, and now we are going to pick up right where we left off. If you joined me for the Quilting Plan Challenge last week, this is going to be a lovely little recap for you. If you were not able to join in the challenge because of time commitments, you didn't know about it yet, whatever, I'm thrilled that you're here. Okay, you ready? Let's do it. So welcome to Introduction to Quilting Plans, how to make a quilting plan and finish your quilts. I always love to give a little gifty right at the beginning of any of my workshops, in huge part because I know that this is going to be a lot of information to absorb in a very short period of time. So I am grabbing a link. There's a QR code on your screen. But I am grabbing a link to make it a little bit easier for the Confident Quilting Plan Workbook. Everything we're going to talk about over the next hour or so is encapsulated in this workbook for easy reference after our time together. And because tonight is all about creating a spark, okay? I want to jumpstart your momentum quilting your own quilts. And we're going to start at the very highest level, which is really doing some really cerebral work of how do I quilt it. All right. Hello, Lisa in Tennessee. Juliet said, I made that quilt. This is my Lanterns of Hope pattern. And Juliet, thanks for making it. Now, if you are new around here, allow me to introduce myself. As I said, my name is Holly Knight, and I have been teaching free motion quilting and ruler quilting and other quilt finishing techniques since 2017. And I've watched thousands of quilters just like you grow in your confidence to finish your quilts through my blog, workshops, and digital courses. Also, you know, tiny little flex that I haven't even had a chance to post on the internet yet. You see these Best of Gwinnett awards up here, and these are awarded to businesses in our local county that kind of stand out in their field. And I am delighted to say that we won for the 5th year in a row this year. And that's a fun little thing that I thought I would share with you. Outside of quilting, I am married to the hubster. He's the cutie in the top right, and we have 2 amazing Bubbas, Jim and Ian. They're in the bottom left there. Havana is my soul dog in the bottom right. She also is directly under my feet right now. She will be glued to me until further notice because I have been gone for a whole week, and it'll take her a minute to recover. Bless her sweet little heart. Also, one other note on the Best of Gwinnett. Many of you voted for us. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Not pictured on these slides are our 3 cats, which is entirely too many cats, but they're cute, so we keep them. And I often like to say that if I am not quilting, I am training for my next marathon. And right now, that actually means I am tapering for my next marathon. I race on Sunday. So, nothing like a tight turnaround from the marathon of QuiltCon to a literal marathon. I'll keep y'all posted on how that goes. So tonight we are answering a very important question. What the heck do I quilt wear? And this is a really important question because when we make a quilt pattern, and you know what, Juliet, you said that you made Lanterns of Hope. Let's use that as an example, okay? Because if I'm going to throw somebody under the bus, it should probably be myself. That seems kindest, right? As a quilt pattern designer, when you decide to make one of my quilt patterns, you open up that pretty little pattern and we go skipping through the daisies together, ideally, right? Hopefully things go well. You have a really good time making it. And I walk you step by step by step through the process of gathering your fabric, cutting your fabric, piecing your fabric, and assembling a quilt top. And then at the end of the quilt pattern, there is a critical sentence: quilt and bind as desired. And that is where I skip you right across that field of daisies and check you off a cliff, emotionally speaking, right? So we've all had this experience. We are having the best time, and then we're just stuck of what do I do now? Now, I will say I do try to put a few ideas in the back of my patterns, but the real key here is that within a quilt pattern, there's not room to really expand, right? Okay, so Juliet, see, okay. I knew that we would be a good example. And Juliet, I have great news for you. I have put a net, and I'm going to catch you tonight and show you how to quilt this quilt, okay? So my goal tonight is that when you have that kind of emotional experience of being thrown off a cliff of like, okay, but now what, right? What I'm going to teach you this evening is the net that you are going to learn the steps with me tonight, and then you're going to create it for yourself. You're going to have these skills going forward. Does that sound helpful? Drop an emoji in the chat for me if that sounds helpful. Rebecca says, I'm in bed with tea. I know everything because of Holly Ann. Thank you, Rebecca. You are incredible. You're still here in the States though, right? Are you already back in Ireland? I'm doing the math in my head of the time difference. Well, everybody has a chance to put an emoji or something else in the chat. Rebecca, are you already back? Or are you still here? I'm unsure. Anyway, drop those emojis for me if this sounds helpful. So what is a quilting plan, right? Well, a quilting plan allows you to practice on paper. So you can free motion quilt or ruler foot quilt or ruler quilt or walking foot quilt. Your quilt, oh, there's the emojis. I knew they were coming. Without fear of messing up your quilt. Right? I love your emoji choices, guys. I got a wave. I got heart eyes. I got smiley faces. Rebecca's home in Ireland. Girl, that's amazing. I love that. I hugged her on the show floor in Raleigh, North Carolina yesterday, and now she's tuning in all cozied up home in Ireland. How delightful. So together, I'm going to walk us through this process of how to make a plan so that once you finish that beautiful quilt top, you can base it and get your quilt finished. It might look something like this, right? This is actually the quilting plan for one of my best known quilts, Lanterns of Hope, which we've been discussing. This is a very specific version of Lanterns of Hope that is the cover quilt on the pattern, and also this hung at QuiltCon 2020. And you'll notice this is a very custom quilted quilt for 2 reasons. My plan was for this quilt to hang at QuiltCon. I knew I wanted to submit it. And 2, I am just a real geek for custom quilting. I really, really like it. Now, there's a couple of things that I want you to observe about this quilting plan. The first is that it is drawn in pencil. Now, at the time, that probably was pretty incidental. It was probably what I had handy. I'm a sucker for a good pencil, right? But it's become very symbolic of the second thing that I want you to notice, and that is that when you make a quilting plan, it's kind of like planning a road trip. There's some flexibility to the matter. So if you play the Highlights Magazine eyeball game with these two images and compare them, you will notice that they are not identical. The quilting plan that I drew is not exactly the same of how I ultimately ended up quilting it. The proportions on the circles are a little bit different. Some of the designs inside some of the circles is a little bit different. And all of that is because we are creating a fluid idea, right? This is not a blood pact that what you draw on that page has to be exactly what you quilt. But the goal is to create enough confidence and enough comfort in where you're headed that you can take action, right? We need to have a little bit of courage and then get into action, because that 20 seconds of insane courage that gets us started to quilting, that action of starting the quilting process, is the very thing that's going to create real confidence over time. Now, I compared a quilting plan to a roadmap, and the idea of planning a road trip. Okay. No more worrying about what to quilt where once you get going on this process. Think about if you were to plan a trip from Georgia to Yellowstone, right? That's a pretty long way. Right now, there is probably at least one person who would wake up on a Sunday morning and go, you know what? I'm just going to start driving today and I'm going to end up in Yellowstone. There's always some of us who are comfortable with that level of uncertainty. But if you're like me, you would at least like to know the concept of how we're going to do this. How many days is it going to take to drive? How far are we driving each day? Do we know where we're planning to stop each night? Do we have reservations when we get to Yellowstone? Right? Having some of those big ideas fleshed out before we start a road trip is going to make the whole process a lot smoother. And that's the idea behind making this quilting plan. A quilting plan is also a safety net. I do not expect you to baste a quilt and sit down to quilt it and quilt the whole thing in a single quilting session. In fact, I would strongly advise you against it. Okay. It's very difficult on your body to do that. And life probably just doesn't allow it, right? At some point, the dog is going to need to go out. You're going to need to go to the bathroom. You're going to get hungry. You're going to have errands to run. You're going to have to go to work, right? There's going to be things that come up. And before I started making quilting plans and just kind of made it up as I went along, sometimes I had really great ideas for how I thought I wanted to quilt my quilt. And right as I came up with that idea, the kiddos would wake up from a nap, right? This was when they were very wee. And inevitably, I would come back after bedtime and have no clue what my brilliant idea was. But by writing down our quilting plan ahead of time, we can pick up right where we left off without anxiety about forgetting our designs. A quilting plan is also a really fun way to experiment with our quilting without having to quilt 11 frillion quilts. Now, as you will see as we go through this presentation, I've quilted a lot of versions of Lanterns of Hope, right? We're like a couple of minutes into this and you've already seen 2 of them. So that's me. It's my pattern. We're not surprised by that, but you probably don't want to have to quilt every single idea that you have in order to see what it's going to look like. Instead, you can draw those ideas and decide which one best fits your personal taste and skill level before you ever start stitching. Making a quilting plan is valuable because trying things on paper is a lot less scary than actually quilting your quilt. Now, we're going to start by discussing the types of quilting plans. And this is going to give us an idea of how many motifs we need to choose. This is essentially how custom is the quilting plan. Before we get to that, we need to know the quilt's job. Some quilts are made to be used and loved a lot, like these, right? This is when the Bubbas were really little, but let me tell you, what we do with quilts around my house really hasn't changed a whole lot. I came home from QuiltCon today to find 2 quilts under my couch, right? They were probably on the couch at some point. They probably got pulled down by a cat and got they, were napped on. But they're getting loved hard, right? I don't know if y'all can see, but there's a quilt. Oop, let's see, on this chair behind me. Not the one that's folded. Notice the one that's like bunched up on the chair. Because somewhere along the way this week, it got snuggled under by a kiddo. Other quilts get used regularly, but much more gently, like bed quilts, okay? So these are quilts that have a high visual impact because they're kind of the focus point of a room, but they are still going to get washed and used pretty regularly. And then other quilts are mostly for looking at. They're quilts that hang on the wall. This is Lanterns of Hope hanging at QuiltCon, as I mentioned. The only other quilt I have hanging on the wall in this room is behind y'all. So we're going to spare y'all the spin around, right? But some quilts, that's what they're designed for, is mostly to be looked at. And what you're going to use your quilt for is going to determine the type of quilting plan that you create. You're going to take into consideration how heavily used the quilt is going to be, right? Is it getting dragged through the mud because it's a picnic blanket? Is it getting turned into a fort? Is it like in a guest room where hardly anyone touches it, right? And you can customize the amount of time and effort your quilting takes based on like how much that job means to you and how much you like custom quilting or not custom quilting or the quilting process in general. Here's what I mean. Before I tell you what I mean, big giant asterisk. It's also okay if you are like me and you just love custom quilting, right? I love the process of quilting my quilts. And if every single quilt I create could be custom quilted, that would be my ideal scenario. Okay. The reality of life is that that's not always how that happens, but I'm going to give you some guidelines on when you might use different types of quilting plans. And if you particularly love or particularly don't love the quilting process, you may throw out this advice. Which brings me to one more important point before I break down these quilting plans for you. Please remember that most of the hard and fast rules you've probably been told about quilting are a myth. Okay? A lot of rules in quilting are made up. Rules tend to make us feel safe. And so when we hear them, we don't want to break said rules because we're afraid of being rejected by our fellow quilters. Unfortunately, made up rules sometimes become fodder for what I call your inner mean grump. Now, if you just pictured a cranky Mr. Potato Head, that's exactly the vibe. Your inner mean grump is that critical voice that lives in your head that never really believes in you and is always afraid that something is going to go wrong. Okay? So if you have been told things like, you should never cross your quilting lines. You should never touch your tension. You should always stitch in every ditch. Real quilters custom quilt their quilts. All of those are made up rules. Okay. So what I'm about to teach you as far as the different types of quilting plans are technically also made up rules. So if at any point you want to throw them out because you really like simple quilting or you really like complex quilting, that's okay. But I find that having a framework is really helpful because it gives us language, and having that language and framework helps also calm that inner mean grump. I hope that makes sense. If you've got questions, drop them in the chat. Which, big picture, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. That's what I'm here for. So let's talk about the first type of quilting plan, an all-over quilting plan. This is the most common quilting plan, bar none. This is pantographs. This is an all-over meander. This is all-over straight line walking foot quilting. This is anything that is just one motif on your quilt. It is a really great fit for quilts that need to get done quickly. It's a really great fit if you're a beginner and you have a limited number of motifs in your repertoire so far, or a limited number of motifs that you feel confident quilting. And it's great for quilts that are going to get a lot of use, that if they get dirty, muddy, messed up, it might hurt your feelings if your custom quilting got messed up, right? Like I know some folks that when they fully custom quilt something, it's very precious to them, and that's totally fine. But if the quilt being precious to you means that if your kid drags it through a mud puddle, it's going to break your heart a little bit, that may not be the best one to custom quilt, okay? All over quilting plans can look like this. So this is that water lanterns of hope that you saw at the very beginning. The white fabric that's in the top left has this lovely little wave design on it. And I took that and made it into an all over quilting plan. So there are a lot of little wavy lines and sort of half swirly shapes on here, just going simply top to bottom. This has a square spiral, so little squares that spiral into one another, covering the whole quilt top. Where my last quilt that I showed you, the quilting plan mimicked the fabric. Here it mimics the piecing, right? So taking those square shapes and adding another layer of them. And then this is floating pluses, and it has an all over swirl. And I just thought that would look really pretty on those bright colors, right? Sometimes there's a deep story, sometimes there's not. Now, the second type of quilting plan is a semi-custom quilting plan. For this, you're going to choose 2 or 3 motifs. This is perfect if you are learning how to quilt your quilts and you've got a few motifs kind of in your wheelhouse and you're wanting to try mixing and matching them together. Try transitioning from one motif to another and back. This is also really great for quilts that you want that little touch, but you don't necessarily want to spend the time and effort of fully custom quilting. So I think about like gifts that are for people that we really care about, but it's a quilt that we still want them to use, right? Like we don't want it to make it's so intricate that they're nervous to use it. So maybe it's a quilt that you put one motif across the main part of the quilt and you put another motif in the border, all right? That would be a beautiful example of semi-custom quilting. This is Big Sky Scar. Nope, Big Sky Star. Can y'all hear the tired? We're doing our best. By Plains and Pine, which she had a booth at QuiltCon for the first time this year, and it makes me so happy when I see like designers exhibiting for the first time. That's such a big deal, and it was so fun to see her and cheer for her this week. So Big Sky Star has continuous curves, which think of like an orange peel shape in all the diamonds of this star, and paisleys in the background. This is Middle Sister by Katie Zom, and it has cute little loop-the-loops in all of the white and then stitch in the ditch around all the little sashing bits. And in this instance, I really wanted to add to that star shape with my continuous curves. And here I wanted to make all the brightly colored half square triangles pop. So I only quilted the background. Next up, we have type number 3, and spoiler, my favorite, fully custom quilting. This is going to be any quilting that you use 4 or more motifs, and anytime that you mix and match free motion quilting and ruler quilting. So even if it's maybe only like 3 motifs, but you're mixing and matching the techniques, then I would count that as fully custom. The big distinction with fully custom quilting is that it requires a little bit more confidence and skill and probably a lot more time to quilt. This is my Dogwood Blossoms block mixed in with some bees by Lori Holt. And all of the bees have lovely little details that just make them more bee-like, right? Lines in the wings. That center bee actually has a little crown on her head because she's clearly the queen. We have beautiful feather flowers in the petals of the Dogwood Blossoms block. And then in the background of the queen bee, I even quilted some hexagons with a ruler. There's a lot going on this quilt. This is Chilhowie by Bonnie Hunter. One of the Rockstars pieced this quilt and said, have fun custom quilting it, go ham. And I absolutely did, as you can see with all of the textures here. And then this is my very own Polaris. If you attended QuiltCon last year, you saw this hanging in our booth. This is a queen size quilt from one of my patterns and 5 years worth of Ruby Star Society. And you can see that I use rulers to create a lot of secondary designs on the quilt block to add lots and lots of texture. Now, any questions, any questions thus far? We've already covered quite a bit of ground. Karen says, I love this. And that makes me really, really happy. Because hopefully your brain is starting to go, oh, wait, there's not a mystery science to this. This is not top secret. After Nerd 38 says, can you clarify what you mean by custom quilting? Is it using different motifs on different parts of the quilt? Great question. So really it's more about the amount of quilting, so the density and variety of motifs. So here on Polaris, you can see we've got feathers, we have pebbles, we have ruler quilting. There's some grid work here. There's continuous curves in the star points. So there's in this instance, this custom quilting is showing up by adding lots of detailed choices inside of the piecing. On the Lanterns of Hope that I showed you right at the beginning, the more like pink one, like pink and orange and yellow, I call that quilting outside the lines, where I created a custom quilting design. So, using ruler quilting and free motion quilting and a wide variety of motifs to create a quilting pattern that completely disregarded the piecing itself and added a whole nother layer. Let me know if that answers your question. Hopefully it does. All right. Now, how do we draw these quilting plans? Because as you can imagine, it's great to know how many motifs you want to quilt on your quilt, but you may also need to decide what you're quilting where. Remember, a quilting plan allows us to practice our motifs before we start to quilt. And there's 3 ways that we can create them. First up, the most accessible, most common is get a picture, whether you draw one on graph paper or literally take one with your phone or iPad and print it out and have a paper picture of the front of your quilt top. And then you can draw on top of it what you're going to do with your stitching lines. I really like this method because it's accessible. Just about anybody can do it. I also really like this method. My brain just quit because I love the feeling of using school supplies, right? I'm a total school supplies nerd. I'm like, give me like a notebook and a pen and let me go. All right. The downside though is that anytime you want to make changes, you're either going to have to erase and thus lose your last option, or you're going to have to redraw it completely. So it can be time and paper consuming if it's taking you a minute to hash out your ideas. Which brings me to method number 2. You could draw your quilting plan digitally. I'm on Apple products, so I use an app called Procreate, and it allows me to bring a photo into the app and then draw on it with my Apple Pencil. If you're on a different tablet or if you don't want to get Procreate for whatever reason, any app that allows you to import a photo and then draw on it will work for this process. I am dreaming of the day when Prequilt, the software that allows you to choose fabrics for your patterns, when Prequilt has this feature as well. That would make me very, very happy. Okay. What's the advantage of this is that you can carry lots of quilting plans with you without carrying a stack of papers. But also that if I was quilting a quilt like this, where I need to pick one motif for the critter, the elephant in this case, and another motif for the background. Please excuse me, y'all. I'm so sorry. My poor little body. I could draw different options in different layers inside the app and then digitally mix and match different elephant motifs and different background motifs without having to redraw it a whole bunch of times. That's really helpful. Now, the third method I recommend using in conjunction with one of the first 2, and that is plexiglass tracing. So taking a piece of plexiglass or clear plastic of some sort, put like hot pink tape around the edge so you don't accidentally get ink on your quilt. Lay that over your quilt top and draw the quilting plan to scale right there over the quilt top. Because sometimes, especially if our blocks are really big or really small, it can be difficult to capture that scale when we're drawing on paper or digitally and make sure our quilting plan works. So this can be a great option as well. So it allows you to make sure that the scale makes sense for your quilting plan, but it also gives you the opportunity maybe to decide where you're going to start and how you're going to move across the quilt without having to break thread too often. Right? There was a time when I was obsessed with not breaking thread unless I ran out of bobbin. I've gotten over that a little bit, but I do still like to be as efficient as possible, right? I've kind of arrived at a place where I'm like, if I get stuck in a corner, I'll break thread. It's not the end of the world, but I like to get as far as I can because having to bring that bobbin thread up and bury it and all of that actually takes quite a bit of time. It can add a lot of time to your quilting process. Now, if you are new to quilting, these are 10 motifs that I recommend. If any of y'all watched Bob Ross on PBS, you know that he uses the same like 6 to 10 colors over and over and over again. Now, there are definitely more quilting motifs in the world, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them at the end of our time together when I talk to you about Quilting Rockstar University and how you can continue building momentum on what we're doing together this evening. But these first 10 are a really strong starting place to give you a little toolbox to make your quilting plans from. Sherry says, oh, excuse me. Oh, I had to give in to that one. Oh, dear. Sherry says, I just got home from QuiltCon yesterday and had to work today. I'm feeling you on the yawns. It's lovely to meet and chat with you in person. I'm loving all your tips and tricks. Sherry, I'm so sorry if I'm setting off your yawns. I'm doing my very best not to, but I will say I am going to sleep real good tonight. So now that we know how many motifs we need to choose, right? We decided how custom we're going to be with this quilting plan. And we've talked a little bit about how we're going to draw our motifs. How do we pair those things together, right? How do we take our quilt top and take those motifs and pick which ones we're actually going to use? I have a couple of key questions to guide you as you begin to draw your quilting plan. The first thing I want you to ask is what part of your quilt needs to stand out? Which part of your quilt is the star of the show? In this particular block, it's the leaves, okay? The quilt that's sitting in front of me, there's a star in the center. There's usually some part of your quilt that is your favorite, okay? That piece of the puzzle, if you will, is either going to get the most intricate quilting or the least quilting, depending on how you want to highlight it. So you're going to begin by making that selection. Anything larger than your palm, right, about 4 inches square, needs some sort of quilting, or it's going to get kind of saggy and funny looking, right? So all of these leaves, I stitched in the ditch around them, even though I left them unquilted, so they have a nice crisp edge, and so that they, pop out and are secured, even though they're not actually quilted down. Then question number 2, I want you to fill in the big building blocks of your quilt. Is there a background? Is there a border? Is there sashing? Right? So these areas that are not necessarily that visually interesting, but probably make up a lot of real estate of your quilt. That by the time you answer question 1 and question 2, you've covered a lot of ground, and most, if not all, of that quilt is filled in, okay? If there's anything left, you're going to do that after question number 2. Question number 3 is, have I created enough visual contrast in the densities of the designs and the types of motifs that I've chosen? We want there to be a level of consistency of how something is quilted, right? If we leave too large of an area totally unquilted or quilted a lot looser than the areas around it, the fabric will sag in funny ways, and it'll kind of look like pantyhoses falling down or knee socks that keep slipping down. We want things to be pretty evenly quilted, but we also want to consider things like the contrast of designs. So I love this Good Fortune by Bonnie Hunter that I had the privilege of quilting for a Rockstar many moons ago now. And in this particular instance, I decided that I wanted all of these batiks to absolutely pop and shine. And it's a Bonnie Hunter quilt, so they're little, right? They were all small enough to leave unquilted, and I could just stitch in the ditch. But in the background, I wanted to do some really cool stuff. So you can see I have feathers, I have continuous curves, I have switchbacks, and this idea of contrast is twofold. One, I have some interesting contrast between the quilted and unquilted areas. But second, I have some interesting contrast between the more organic feathers and the more linear switchbacks. It makes it really intriguing to look at this quilt and see how it all took shape. Remember, a quilting plan's job is to make you feel more confident and help you have fun during the quilting process. But you might be wondering how you actually learn about the quilting part. Now, before I jump in, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about Quilting Rockstar University, where we can continue quilting together, I'd love to know, are there any questions about this process? I generally start thinking about quilting plans even while I am piecing a quilt. I try to pay attention to what sections of the quilt really stand out to me, what I think I might want to emphasize. And then as the quilting top or quilt top comes together is usually when I start drawing my quilting plan. You're going to use the principles and questions that I asked you tonight to draw your quilting plan sometime between the piecing process and finishing the basting process. If all else fails, I recommend picking a background design. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes it just takes a minute for a quilt to speak to us, right? We know that we want to do something cool in all the stars, but we don't know what the cool thing is yet. Start by quilting your background. If you decided what motif you want for that, that's going to be your starting place. And just like I said at the beginning of our time together, action creates confidence. So the first way that you can build momentum through taking action is being here. Congratulations, you already did that. The second way is by beginning to draw a quilting plan. So making a decision about what motifs you think you're going to like in each of those areas. There's not a rule about what those motifs are, right? The only rule is that you like it. It's your quilt. So sometimes I get asked, well, like, what do I quilt in half square triangles? Well, it depends. There's a lot of different options of what you could quilt in half square triangles. And my recommendation to you is to pay attention to the pictures that you see online, the pictures that you see in books, and practice drawing different ideas until you figure out what you like. Forgive me, I did not want to cough in your ear. But if you are going along and you're trying to create confidence through action and you hit a wall and you just don't know what you want to quilt in certain areas of your quilt, if you can figure out what you want in the background or which areas you want stitch in the ditch, because you don't have to stitch in the ditch absolutely every seam, that gives you a place where you can get started and you can continue drawing your quilting plan while you maintain the momentum of starting to fill in some of the building block quilting of your quilts. All right. I don't see any questions popping up in the chat, but if you think of them, please feel free to ask. But I have a question of my own. Are you ready to be a quilting rock star? My guess is that if you are here, you are curious not only about deciding what to quilt where, but also how to actually quilt it. And that's exactly what we do inside of Quilting Rockstar University. And you, my dear, are invited. Quilting Rockstar University allows you to finally feel the joy and creativity that you crave. Our online courses are a proven way to learn how to finish your own quilts, connect with an amazing quilting community, and grow as a confident free motion quilting, ruler quilting, quilting rock star. Megan says, I loved the permission to play. Great video shows how to do each motif, but with no firm requirement on how we had to use it in a final project. There's an option to graduate from each class just because we really like to celebrate the work that you do. I really thought it would be difficult, but once I got going, it wasn't that hard. Practice is fun. You give us the confidence to get past our fears and get started. I really enjoyed this class, possibly even more than the free motion one. So in case you hadn't guessed, Megan took Ruler Quilting Academy, one of the courses that's inside of Quilting Rockstar University. Sandra said, I loved Hack's enthusiastic support and teaching style, the supportive environment that's cultivated, and the permission to not be perfect. I think that's another one of those myths that our brain really loves to hand us, is that if we're going to quilt our own quilts, it has to be perfect for some reason. And quilting is never perfect, right? We're human. It's important and it's meaningful for us, but perfection isn't the goal. Sally asked a really great question. Where do you actually start quilting, and is that in your quilting plan? The focal point, the background. So there's not a right or wrong answer here, Sally. And what I would say is that my answer varies based on the quilt. If I am working on my long arm, I'm obviously going to be working in passes. So I'm generally starting in the top left, whether that's kind of in the main body of the quilt or out at the outside edge. If there's borders and things like that, I usually start in the main body of the quilt and work outward. Sometimes folks say that you have to start in the very center of the quilt and cannot start near the edges. no matter what, because it'll shift and things will get funky. And I used to kind of be in that school of thought. And then I realized that that's really just a basting issue. So as long as your quilt is well basted, you can start wherever it makes sense to your brain. When I have a quilting plan drawn out and I'm trying to decide where I want to start, I do this very technical thing. I take my finger and I put it on the quilt and I start kind of mocking out my quilting plan to see where it makes the most sense to begin and how to connect to the different other parts of the quilting plan. I know that it is possible for that to be a frustrating answer because there's not a hard and fast rule behind it, but that is where some of this like experimentation and playfulness comes in. Of I love to describe and show what works for me, but that doesn't, may not always be exactly what you like to do. In fact, this is really fabulously connected to some of the things that are included in Quilting Rockstar University, because Quilting Rockstar University includes 4 pre-recorded courses: Free Motion Quilting Academy, Ruler Quilting Academy, Custom Quilting Academy, and Long Arm Preparatory. Now, those first 2 courses are very motif-based. Okay, so you're going to learn about 30 free motion quilting motifs in FMQA. You're going to learn about 24 ruler quilting motifs in RQA. And those second 2 courses are much more process-based. So Custom Quilting Academy is one of the things that ties in really well to this question, Sally, is it's all about the different custom quilting projects that I have done over the years and how I've thought about them. So there's an entire unit on the different ways you can quilt different units, like half square triangles, 4 patches, etc. There's an entire video, a whole section on how to quilt different blocks, right? Log cabins, etc. Then there's different types of quilts, and I've broken down different plans that I've done over the years so that you can really get a look into my process and start to create your own that makes sense for you and your brain. The other thing that really connects to your question, Sally, is these quarterly custom quilting masterclasses that we do live. And so each quarter I quilt a different quilt live on camera. So I draw the quilting plan ahead of time, but I do not answer any of the questions about where am I going to start, how am I going to execute this, etc. before we sit down together and we have a camera like this and a camera over my shoulder, and I talk you through, here's the quilting plan, here's the quilt, let's figure out together where we're starting and how we're going to proceed, and then I begin to quilt it. And the whole point of those master classes is trying to kind of like open up my brain and show you my thought process, because sometimes you really need to see this like in action, right? And what better way than with an actual quilt under the needle? Great questions. Therese says, do you spray base or stitch base? If I'm on the long arm, I float my quilt tops and I stitch base the top edge. And depending on what I'm doing, sometimes I base down the sides, sometimes I don't. All right. Again, depends on the quilt, depends on the motifs and how I'm moving around the quilt. If I am going to be quilting on my domestic, I spray based. And as Melanie makes reference to here, I use homemade spray based. And it is made with flour and crafting vodka. Yes, you can use rice flour if you have celiac. I think you can also use cornstarch. And I'm going to drop another link in the chat for y'all. This is the Confident FMQ workbook, and it includes the homemade spray-based recipe. So it depends on what I'm quilting on, which machine, because I do both. I teach on both. I go back and forth a lot. And that's a really, really great question. Now, the next link that I'm going to post in the chat is the link to Quilting Rockstar University. As you can see here on the screen, all of this is available to you for $37 a month. And my goal with this is to make it as accessible as possible for you to have all the education that you need to confidently quilt your quilts. Now, I mentioned here that enrollment is open through tonight. And what's significant about that is that we kick off a brand new, I call us cohorts, tomorrow. And what that means is that we'll be welcoming a whole bunch of new members into crew at the same time. And over the next 4 days, I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know in order to make the most of your membership, right? So we're going to make sure you know how to log in and find the courses. We're going to make sure you know how to access the community and chat with me and your fellow rock stars. You're going to have your first live Q&A where you get to ask more questions about the quilting process, and I answer just like this. And we do that almost every single week. Then we're going to talk about the supplies that you need is a surprisingly short list, and make sure that you have them so that you can jump right into these academy courses and use our guide to plan out how you're going to quilt your next quilt, learn the motifs that you need, and then make that quilt a reality. Get it finished so you can snuggle it and love it. Quilting Rockstar University allows you to learn how to quilt your projects from the privacy and comfort of your own home. Now, I am fresh off of QuiltCon. I just spent 14 hours teaching over the last 4 days on the show floor, or at the show, right? I had 4 3-hour classes and 2 lectures, and it was magical. I love being in person with y'all because there's something really special about meeting each other and being kind of in the process together. However, it's difficult when you leave a classroom where everything has been all set up for you. There is a person there to help if anything goes sideways with the machine. I am just across the room and you can wave me over at any time, versus when you get home, right? And you have to do all of this on your own machine. So my courses are designed to walk you through the process of getting your machine set up, getting everything set up and ready. And then you have this beautiful freedom, right? Nobody is over your shoulder. You don't have to feel rushed if class time is ending. You get to move at a pace that makes sense for you. You get to work on the motifs that you are most interested in. And most importantly, you get to be on your own machine and get that set up in a way that is most ergonomic and helpful for you. Quilting Rockstar University encourages you to start with the machine you already have, keeping supplies minimal and affordable. I have had folks be part of Quilting Rockstar University and take my courses on everything from a Singer featherweight and like a $97 Kenmore all the way up to the largest long arm on the market, okay? And everything in between. Free Motion Quilting Academy and Ruler Quilting Academy are both filmed on the domestic machine, those motif-based courses, because the majority of you are on domestic sewing machines, but not all of you are. That's where we have long arm prep that helps make some of that translation. And if you're a new or nervous long arm quilter, long arm prep is going to break down that process for you so it feels exciting rather than scary or overwhelming. Quilting Rockstar University is ready when you are, regardless of geography or time zone, with on-demand, pre-recorded video lessons. At the beginning of our time together, we mentioned that Rebecca is in Ireland. Rebecca has taken all of my courses, and she was able to learn, even though there's a 5-hour time difference between us, because these lessons are pre-recorded and she could log into them at a time that made sense to her. And if she needed to ask questions and wasn't able to join us during the live Q&A, she could ask those in the community, and then I answered them the next time I was live on camera. It also offers you ongoing access to me, as I mentioned. So that way you never feel alone or floundering, and you get near real-time help during our live stream Q&A sessions. I think the downside of another potential downside of an in-person class is that I don't go home with you. Right? So what happens when you go home and you're working on your machine and you get stuck? Crew is the solution to that, right? Of making sure that you continue to have an instructor who can guide you. Hey, Jane, this is a really great question. So Free Motion Quilting Academy, the way that I initially taught it was outlined as a 12-week course. And most folks took 2 to 3 sessions to work through the content because most folks are busy, right? And the other courses were a little bit shorter than that. It's going to be entirely up to you how quickly you want to work through the content and also how much you enjoy the live support. Crew is designed that if you want to be in there forever because you love the community and you love the live events and the live education and the bonuses that we do, there will always be something fresh and new to make sure that you're getting value as a member. It's also designed that if you want to join for a little while because you've got a season of time that you can very intensely practice and learn your quilting, and you want to join and learn the things that interest you most, that you could totally do that. It's designed with all learning styles and approaches in mind. Really good question, Jane. And finally, Quilting Rockstar University is designed to connect you with other rock stars in training. Right at the beginning of our time together, some of y'all were comparing notes about where you're from and places that you've lived. And we've had rock stars discover that they live just a couple of blocks away from each other and they get to be real life friends. We've also had rock stars get to know each other online, offering advice and support as they're on their quilting journeys. And then we connect at places like QuiltCon, and it's like meeting up with old friends, even though you've never met in real life before. It's a really special and encouraging community. And I really love to say that community conquers fear, right? Because it's easy to feel overwhelmed when we're learning something new. We don't do totally new things a lot as a grown-up. And having a friend who believes in us on the days that we have trouble believing in ourselves makes all the difference in the world. This is Gail. Gail says, I loved learning how to use rulers to make different shapes for the backgrounds, fillers, and borders. I love Holly-Ann's realness in her teaching and her positive, encouraging attitude. Margot says, these courses are not a seminar. They are truly in-depth courses. Having access to all of them is spectacular. The community itself is so supportive and fun. I love this group and the education. And Jan says, if I can do it, anyone can. Jan, are you still here with us tonight? Crew has been amazing, and you are getting so much info for anything you want to do. Holly-Ann is amazing, and it's a great group, so much fun, right? I've mentioned several times that action creates confidence, and you've begun that process of building momentum this evening. Another thing I want you to think about is that consistency creates competence. Trying something once or twice is not going to be what makes a difference. Being able to practice in little bite-sized lessons over and over and over again, to ask questions consistently week in and week out so you make progress on your journey, that's how you're going to see those gains and skills begin to really grow. And that's the support that's designed inside of Crew. So Quilting Rockstar University is open now. We are getting started with our orientation tomorrow, and I would love for you to come and be with us. If you've got flimsies that are piling up in your sewing room, they're starting to kind of look at you sideways, or maybe you've just been really curious about growing your creativity in this way, Crew is designed with you in mind. We are a fantastic community. I love the education that we've produced to make sure that you have the confidence skills that you need. And if you've been looking for a proven, successful way to master free motion quilting, ruler quilting, custom quilting, long arm quilting, etc., this is the place for you. Rockstars, thank you for being here with me tonight. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I'm dropping this link one more time so you can dive in with us. It's going to be a really special adventure. And if any of you happen to be here who took classes with me at QuiltCon in person, this is the logical next step. Having been with me this evening talking about quilting plans and looking for ways to apply what you've learned to get those quilts done, Quilting Rockstar University is the logical next step. I don't want you to have the knowledge from a class that we did together or the knowledge from tonight and go, that sounds nice, I'll try it someday, right? Life is too short to put off things that could potentially bring us so much joy until someday. Thank you so much for spending your evening with me. Thank you for your patience, as I know I'm a little sleepy from a long week at QuiltCon, but it is always a treat to get to be live and reconnect with y'all. Thank you to all of you who were at QuiltCon with me and took the time to come by the booth. It really means a lot to get to see y'all in person. I love the flexibility that online education allows, so that I can visit you in your sewing room and we can connect from all corners of the world. But that never replaces the magic of getting to spend a little bit of time together at a show. If you have further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach me at hello@stringandstory.com. In the meanwhile, again, my name is Holly-Ann Knight. It's my job to guide you to quilt with confidence, and I look forward to seeing you inside of Quilting Rockstar University. Have a fabulous evening, y'all. Bye for now.